All right, and let's begin. Hello and welcome to today's AAAS event with Ocean Networks Canada. My name is Tessa Owens. I'm a member of Ocean Networks Canada's Learning and Community Engagement team, and I'll be hosting this session today. And you'll be able to participate in today's session via Slido. So this link will be pasted in the Zoom chat, but you can join us at slido.com and enter our code that we're about to share with you. And you can do this on a separate browser tab or on your smartphone. And this is how you'll be able to enter Q&A questions that we'll get to at the end of this session today. So before we begin, I'd really like to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples within whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanish peoples whose historical relationships with the land and ocean continue to this day. 15 years ago, the University of Victoria's Ocean Networks Canada made history by installing the world's first large-scale interactive real-time portal into the ocean. This marked the beginning of the internet-connected ocean, enabling us to advance our planet's understanding of the ocean, or ocean intelligence, at a critical time. ONC's free open data informs everything from monitoring earthquakes and tsunamis to understanding whales, hydrothermal vents, and the impact of climate change on ocean systems, including sea ice in the Arctic. The urgent need to understand and protect our changing ocean is stimulating the next great wave of economic innovation. Fueled by scientific evidence, coordinated efforts, and transformative action, Canada has joined other nations in developing a roadmap to a blue economy, which strikes a balance between economic growth and sustainability. So today, thank you for joining us for this conversation between Kate Moran, President and CEO of Ocean Networks Canada, and science writer Leigh Phillips, as they discuss how we can show cooperative leadership in the global blue economy through ocean intelligence and progressive ocean-based industries and programs. So I'll begin by introducing Kate. Kate Moran is an internationally renowned ocean engineer and the President and CEO of Ocean Networks Canada. Prior to joining Ocean Networks Canada, Kate was Assistant Director in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in Washington, D.C., where she advised on issues related to the oceans, the Arctic, and global warming. Kate has led several major oceanographic expeditions, including the first drilling expedition to the Arctic Ocean in 2004 and the first expedition to find the source of the earthquake that caused the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. She has also made major contributions to the assessment of hazards in Canada's offshore regions. And Leigh Phillips, who's also joining us today, is a science writer and political journalist. His work has appeared in Nature, The New Scientist, Science, The Guardian, The Daily Telegraph, MIT Technology Review, The New Republic, and Jacobin, amongst other outlets. He is the author of two books, 2015's Austerity Ecology on Progressive Challenges Within Environmental Issues, and 2019's The People's Republic of Walmart, co-authored with economist Michał Rozworski on the history of the economic calculation debate. So now I'm really happy to turn this conversation over to Leigh and Kate, and Leigh will be guiding the discussion. Hope you enjoy. Oh, just a second, we're unmuting here. All right, I think Leigh is unmuted and Kate's good to go.
All right. Hi, Kate, how are you doing?
I'm great to see you, Leigh.
Okay, good. Just wanted to check that everybody was unmuted there. All right, so let's just jump right into this conversation about a blue economy, our first topic. The term blue economy may be well known in ocean science and policy circles, perhaps also within maritime industries, but the concept isn't anywhere near as well known amongst the wider public as concepts like green growth or a Green New Deal. So could you give us a bit of a background on what the blue economy concept is, what the new UN Oceans panel is, and why Ottawa is getting very serious about oceans now? One might initially think that the blue economy is about balancing economic growth on the one hand and sustainability in the ocean sector on the other. But it's actually more profound, isn't it, Kate, about how the real and quite colossal economic opportunity is actually in sustainability, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Leigh. And the concept of the blue economy really took root in the last decade by the OECD, where they pulled together basically an economic assessment of the blue economy and put a number that it would grow to something on the order of 3 trillion by 2030. That was really founded on the existing ocean industries, the fisheries, transportation, tourism. Those kinds of industries are really unsustainable. And so what happened next was the OECD did a revision and began to include the word sustainability. And it became clearer and clearer as we have now entered what's now called the climate crisis, that it's essential for us to be taking the blue economy, making it green, and helping to address the climate issues. And one of the aspects that's being taken up by government right now partially because of COVID, but partially because of the fact that the ocean is large and it has this great potential to be an economic driver in a sustainable way. And I think that's really telling with the UN, the ocean panel that was established in 2018, and they just released a report, which is really excellent in terms of grounding the future economy in a sustainable ocean. And they have 5 big themes. 2 of them are clear in their message: ocean health and ocean wealth. And you can't have ocean wealth until you have ocean health. They also have focus on restructuring finance, ocean equity in terms of ensuring that that peoples are around the world have equitable use of the sustainable ocean. So that's happening now, and the leadership in Canada is clear. The Prime Minister was one of the co-authors of that report, as were 13 other leaders, international leaders. And then in the US now, you see there's a new change in government, and there's 2 senators that are introducing an ocean bill that is, again, grounded in the economy of sustaining the ocean and sustaining the health of the ocean. And it's surprising, it's from 2 senators, one from Alaska, the biggest state in the United States, and one from Rhode Island, the smallest state in the United States, but both have huge interests in their own states about growing their economy based on ocean sustainability. So we're in a good spot right now in terms of getting our blue economy going in a green new way.
So just to build on this a little bit, there's another report put out by the same oceans panel regarding a blue recovery, and increasingly we on the across the political spectrum, left and right, nations around the world are recognizing that as we move out of one day moving out of the COVID crisis, that we will need some sort of massive stimulus to overcome the economic fallout from lockdowns and so on and so forth. This report by the UN Oceans Panel noted that of the 10 trillion that has been earmarked already for COVID stimulus is focused on the clean transition, but it's almost entirely terrestrially based. Could you talk a little bit about why we need a blue stimulus, or rather even more that why oceans need to be such a huge part of that clean transition?
I think it's telling. In Canada, it tells the story very well. The Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard launched just this week basically a roundtable discussion about growing Canada's blue economy for stimulus. And the reason is because of the fact that Canada has the longest coastline in the world. Many 50% of people live within certain small kilometer distance from the coastline. And in fact, the current economy and the blue economy in Canada is relatively small. It's like 3% of GDP. And so her message this week is that the opportunity to grow the blue economy in a sustainable way is there for us to grab. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but really to take it up in a sustainable way, because we have the potential to grow that as a large part of our GDP, if we want to measure it that way. And looking at countries like Norway, who've done that, even though initially their blue economies was grounded in oil extraction, they've turned the corner and are moving into economic sustainability in the ocean and moving away from those extractive industries. So I think many countries are going to be taking this turn, and I think it's also critical that the fact, as I mentioned before, there's a new administration in the United States, and as a North American blue economy, Canada has the longest coastline in the world, and the US has the largest exclusive economic zone. So together we can form a sustainable, let's call it an ocean health and ocean wealthy powerhouse in North America. And I think those discussions we're going to see more and more discussions like that. And I'm really excited to be part of them. And I hope we can bring Ocean Networks Canada to that table, because we sit as a foundational organization on the West Coast, but we have assets in the Arctic on the East Coast that can help Canadian industry be more sustainable as we go forward. And there's Ocean Supercluster on the East Coast that has started with industries that were carbon intensive, but have pivoted to moving towards, again, growing sustainable ocean industries. I'll just say one more thing. It's really the fact that the ocean on its own, without our help, has already mitigated climate for us. And I know we'll talk about that in the next question, but the ocean has absorbed 90% of the heat generated by our burning of fossil fuels, and over a third of the carbon dioxide that we've generated from the same thing. So it's already doing the sustainable bit on its own. Now we need to enhance that to make sure that we are protecting the ocean, but also managing it so it can help us be sustainable.
Great. Well, as we move on to the next couple of topics, hopefully we can draw out some of the examples of what these emerging marine industries might be that are indeed sustainable. Along those lines, moving to the second topic, the role of ocean intelligence in the climate crisis. So a theme that is repeatedly mentioned within the blue economy discourse is the challenge and opportunity of climate change. Could you explain in more detail why ocean-based clean energy and maritime climate adaptation will be a huge part of the world's efforts to combat climate change, and why we need much more support for ocean intelligence in order to support that? Also, could you talk about ONC's Solid Carbon Project and how the science of carbon sequestration has developed in recent years and its role in the wider climate strategy?
Sure, yeah, happy to, Leigh. Well, the climate crisis, there's I think the previous President Obama's science advisor said, we have three options: mitigate, adapt, or suffer. And the less we do of the first two, the more we suffer. And that really is that the two key pieces here are mitigation and adaptation. And mitigation, the way climate folks talk about it, it's really two things. It's really dropping our emissions rapidly and also removing CO2 from the atmosphere. And adaptation is developing approaches and services and maybe even infrastructure that allows society to thrive with the existing climate impacts that are ongoing today. And so the ocean plays a big role in both mitigation and adaptation, clearly. On the adaptation side, as I mentioned, CO2 is absorbed by the ocean. It causes the ocean chemistry to change, making it more acidic. And so we need to use ocean intelligence, the data combinations of data to understand how the various locations of the ocean are changing under this regime of ocean acidification. It's important to understand that so we can begin to protect the food web and also protect the growing aquaculture industry, particularly shellfish, because baby shellfish are susceptible to corrosion from ocean acidification. So we need to understand where it's happening the most, how we can adapt and allow both the natural environment to thrive and also the aquaculture. Another example is sea level. We know sea level is rising. It's accelerating in terms of its rise. We need to understand those locations and provide services to help people adapt to and make decisions about how they can adapt to the changing sea level. So those are just two examples. They're big ones. They're big impacts that not only impact just coastal environments, but impact the economy. And I with sea level rise, one of the biggest issues is really combining that with the increasing storms. And so we're seeing that storm impact have direct economic negative and economic impacts. So those are all associated with how do we adapt to climate change, and it seriously sits squarely in the ocean space. In terms of mitigation, as I mentioned, the ocean has already mitigated some of the worst effects of climate change, and so we have to begin to enhance both the natural and even some technological advances to begin to ensure that we can remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Now, I want to be clear here that we are not advocating removing CO2 without extremely rapid reduction in emissions, extremely rapid reductions to net zero, or as close to net zero as possible. But as every recent report has come out, both nationally in Canada, which just came out very recently, and the UN have demonstrated that no matter what path we take in reducing our emissions, we have to remove CO2. And so the research is needed now so that we'll be ready to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. There's many ways you can do it. You can do it with enhancing natural processes like blue carbon, macroalgae, alkalinity, and together those are very important, but there's a small part of the pie. So at Ocean Networks Canada, we're leading a team to combine technologies, direct air capture from our partner Carbon Engineering with ocean platforms on locations in the ocean, which is many of the locations in the ocean where there's ocean basalt, ocean crust, because Icelandic technologists and scientists demonstrated that when they pumped CO2, some of it was direct air captured, they turned to rock in a very short amount of time, 2 years. So what we have in the oceans beneath the seafloor in ocean basalt is this gigantic sequestration reservoir potential. And we need to put technologies together to actually advance that. So we're in our second year of a feasibility study. And we think it will have, if we continue to invest in this research, we can have these technologies ready when they're needed after we drastically reduce our emissions, and we then get to maintain the planet at a temperature that's habitable for humans. So we're very excited about being part of that. And I can tell you that we keep growing the people involved in the project, particularly young people, because of the fact that they want to do something that makes an impact. And so we're getting some of the best minds and the best enthusiasm. How do we actually get this right?
A couple of follow-up questions along those lines. So now my understanding is that off the west coast of North America, off the west coast of Vancouver Island, in fact, the area that this solid carbon project is being where it's being undertaken, there's a special reason why it's there, to do with, whenever we engage in any sort of new endeavor on the seabed, we have to make sure that we're not having a negative impact on biodiversity. And so we need a good baseline there. Could you, to compare against in the future, could you talk a little bit more about why it's happening here?
Yeah, well, so Ocean Networks Canada, we operate real-time observatories that are connected to a telecommunication cable that provides power and high bandwidth internet connectivity. So one of our locations is called Cascadia Basin, and it's a location where it's the best characterized ocean basalt on the planet. Scientists have been studying it for many decades. There's scientific drilling boreholes in the location. And so that's one of the reasons we're involved, is because we can actually do a demonstration here, demonstrating the efficacy of the basalt sitting beneath the seafloor, not just the small amount of this age basalt in Iceland on land. And once we demonstrate that the industry, we expect to see investments, because that's what happened in Iceland. It's clear that many industries are seeing that they need to invest in carbon removal. And so we hope that demonstration could showcase that efficacy. I just didn't want to lose on one point in terms of the ocean. For almost over 15 years, perhaps even coming on 20, it's very clear that offshore wind, well, it's certainly commercial now, it's viable. It is one of the best, most consistent energy sources on the planet. It's a shame that we have very little, and I'll tell you why it's very little offshore wind. It happens. I was in Rhode Island when I was part of a team, but there was others who actually made this happen. We initiated a study to look at offshore wind in Rhode Island for a small island called Black Island that was on diesel. And because it was in state waters, it happened relatively quickly. And it happens to be the only offshore wind farm in the United States, only one in North America. And so we need to get with the program like the Europeans, and we have great potential on the east coast of Canada, close to markets. And on the West Coast, here's another research area. We could begin to be part of that international team advancing floating offshore wind. And I think that could be a wonderful way that Canada contribute with some great researchers who are working on that right now. So I didn't want to miss the energy piece of it, sorry.
Yeah, so that was the second follow-up I was going to sort of push you on, is this huge part of the blue economy and blue stimulus is actually the enormous opportunity within blue energy. There's a few other ones as well, like wave and tidal, possibly floating nuclear barges. And what's really exciting about all of these is, and what's surprising when so much of the discussions about terrestrial-based clean energy, which is absolutely necessary and awesome, is, as you say, it's much more consistent offshore, much more reliable, which allows greater integration into the grid. So yeah, absolutely enormous opportunity there. Can we maybe move on to the third topic, mission-oriented science for society and industry? So which fits in with what we were just talking about, really. So sometimes we put science in a silo or ivory tower over here, and science and industry in another silo over there. But increasingly, there's a realization of the need to bridge the gap between the very necessary blue sky, curiosity-driven research and solving the problems of society. We are seeing increased attention both at the policy level and within universities to the need for funding for applied or translational research, and at least rhetorical commitments to more interdisciplinary research. How do you feel that ONC distinguishes itself in this regard from other research institutes? Your slogan is Ocean Intelligence for Society, for Science, Society, and Industry. So what do you mean by this? And where do you, I guess, to push you a little bit here, to be opinionated, where do you think decision makers are getting such mission-oriented policy right? And what more do you think needs to be done?
Okay. Well, Ocean Networks Canada, we operate infrastructure that is designed and built around the ecosystem of supporting ocean research, all the way from earthquakes, as Tessa introduced in the beginning, to marine mammals, to microbes, to chemistry, and we even have now a neutrino array in the deep ocean. So we're into the world of ocean-based high energy particle physics. So anything, we're good at measuring anything and everything in the ocean. That does take, it's not an inexpensive operation. It does take funds, because as I used to like to, I enjoyed always letting Minister Garneau, who was until recently the Minister of Transportation in Canada and an astronaut, that it was the work we did in the ocean was much harder than what he had to do in space.
Really?
Because it's a vacuum, so you can use duct tape, and it's easy to keep things together.
Right, of course.
Yes. I mean, of course, the launch is the hardest part. Let's set the launch, but once you're in space, it's a cakewalk compared to what we do. So it costs money, and so and we have a large part of our funding comes from public dollars, and it's really from a moral point of view, it's morally right for us to make sure we use these research infrastructure and the data that comes from them for the benefit of the broader stakeholders in the country. That's society and industry, and so that's what we've decided to do. And so the scientific community uses our data, and we package it for them in ways that they like to see, and we keep trying to improve that. But they're really the ones doing that research and publishing it, and not ourselves. In terms of those other two stakeholder groups, we're taking our own data, combining it with other data and models to provide products that benefit society. And so one of the I'll give you two examples. One is earthquake early warning. We have now installed Canada's first regional earthquake early warning system for southwestern British Columbia. And so we are combining data to provide up to 1.5 minutes of alerting time to, we won't do the public alerting, the government will do that, but we are also working with infrastructure operators so that they can take the data quickly and automatically do things like shutting down pipelines, bringing elevators to the floor, stopping operations, saving lives and saving infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what we're working on, and that has some industry benefit, but of course it really is about saving lives. In terms of on the same sense, that there was a big earthquake this morning in the South Pacific, and so we were worried about a tsunami impact. So we also monitor tsunami waves. It turned out that was going to only be a local tsunami in near the Solomon Islands, and it's not going to cross the ocean and impact us, but it could have. And so we have the sensor systems to provide those kind of alerting systems. But one of the things that we're most proud of in terms of society benefits is the fact that after we installed a community observatory, a small version of our telecommunication cabled systems off of the west coast of British Columbia, we installed a small system up in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. And we did it for, to see if our system could work in the Arctic, see if we can deliver data over a small satellite pipeline. And that worked. But we used a sensor system built by ASL, a company here on Vancouver Island, that measures sea ice thickness. And so what was clear to us was that the community wanted to see those sea ice thickness data in the co-op store so they could see how thick the ice was, because they do a lot of their work and their playing on the ice. And so that was a real eye-opener for us. It was like, if that community wants to have their own oceanfront data for their own decision-making, other communities do too. And now we've grown that program to we have partnerships with 33 Indigenous communities, First Nations in BC, Inuit in the Arctic, and now 2 new communities, one in Labrador and one in Nova Scotia. And so it's really not us pushing to say, here's what you need.
Yeah,
our discussions with them about what they need. And communities have very different needs. Across all of them, they want to have their kids, of course, learn more about science, technology, engineering, and math. So that's kind of across the board. And that's just working in the ocean gets kids excited to actually pursue some of those careers and learn more. But some communities are interested in understanding whales off their coast. Some are interested in the ship noise. So it's a wonderful program, and we're really proud to be helping to deliver that. So that's the society side. I'll mention, just because I just talked about ASL, for industry right now, what we try to do as best we can is showcase Canadian sensors, ocean sensor systems, because they're some of the best in the world, and we purchase them and we host them on our network, and then they can actually go to that for real-time data to their international markets, and it does help them be internationally competitive on that global stage. We hope to grow that as the blue economy takes off, so that we can actually showcase some of that small and medium-sized enterprise ocean industry strength in Canada across the country.
I mean, this is just amazing. It really is. It's deeply cool. But there's also this lovely thread of let's say social justice within there. And I wanted to draw it a little bit more, because you hit on it a little bit there with Nunavut, but ONC really has much more of a commitment to Indigenous reconciliation than lets on just from that little anecdote there. Could you talk a bit more about that? And I would also say it's a really interesting environment in how many women are involved with ONC, and we've been really challenged as a society in the last few years on both of these fronts in terms of Indigenous justice and women's rights, not just within society, but actually within STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math as well. Could you give us a bit more detail along those lines?
Sure, I'll start with the Indigenous engagement. And one of the, just as we go forward, we really value Indigenous knowledge. And so we're always working hard at trying to combine some of the data that we assist them in capturing, but with Indigenous knowledge. But last year, before COVID, we always participated in this conference, but it's called Ocean OBS 19. It was in September in Hawaii last year. And it's a conference that happens only every 10 years, and it brings together stakeholders to look at the next 10 years of what kind of ocean observations are needed for a broad range of stakeholders. But as Ocean Networks Canada, we realized that they didn't have Indigenous peoples as stakeholders. And I guess that it was just kind of stunning. And so we just set out to make it happen. And we scrounged around for money, and we got enough money to really bring together representatives from 53 Indigenous communities, many of them around the Pacific Rim. There were, I think, 13 from Canada, all three coasts. And we thought this was just going to be a start. We'll bring them together. They can be talking to each other about their own ocean issues, from sustainable food to pollution to sea level rise, etc., sea ice loss. And they were able to, so we had this room where they were able to discuss things and participate in the conference. Well, it turned out that it became the showcase of the conference, and they were able to write a clear declaration of what they need as an Indigenous peoples and presented it to the IOC chair at the conference. And we're continuing that work today. So our chief scientist here at Ocean Networks Canada is continuing to engage with those communities to ensure that their voices and their needs are incorporated into the work that gets done as we just launched the UN Decade of Ocean Research. And so we're just, again, thrilled to be part of it, but it's really the fact that these communities stepped up and really want their voices heard. And in terms of what we do locally in Canada with our communities, we work hard at hiring a community member, we call them youth science ambassadors, and hire them to be that interface between the type of scientific ocean data we help them capture and their community. And so that's been pretty successful. One of the first youth science ambassadors we hired was a woman named Mia Tokiak, who from Nunavut, who graduated from high school, loves science, and now works in science in the Nunavut government. And so it's wonderful to see those kinds of outcomes where we're really helping these communities not only with their own data, but with having their kids become extremely valuable members and fluent in science. They don't necessarily have to go into science, but having that fluency really helps them in society. And I think there's an anecdotal story I'll share. A colleague of mine from SFU came to visit Simon Fraser University, for those AAAS, who does work in the Arctic. And he came to visit us last summer before COVID and mentioned that he was up in Cambridge Bay fairly recently. And he goes to the schools every time he visits Cambridge Bay. And he's told me that when he asked the young kids, they were in elementary school, what they wanted to be when they grew up, they were saying ocean scientists. And it's because of the fact that we have a community observatory up there since 2012. So it's anecdotal, but it just goes to show you that these small focused efforts can really make a big difference. And so we're committed to that. Now, you had other parts to your question I've forgotten.
It was just if there's anything you would want to say to sort of policymakers where just where you think they're getting things right, and what you would love them to see them do more of in terms of the blue economy, but also just ocean science in general.
Well, I think policy in the ocean space has been lagging for a while. Earthquake early warning is not necessarily an ocean issue, but for subduction earthquakes, which happen in the ocean, it is. And so our earthquake early warning system is pushing policy. There's no policy on how you deliver that. And so having policy lag means that we're delayed in getting that benefit to society. So I think one of the benefits of, what I did appreciate when I worked in Washington, D.C. in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, it's a unique shop. And I think Canada could actually try to, and it's moving down that path with the science advisor and a team around the Canadian Science Advisor. So it's going in that direction, which is terrific. But that's where the policy shop stays linked to science and technology. And it's not perfect, but it is there to make sure that the policy is developed and ensures that as technology advances, it can be utilized, and even pushes the policy as the technology advances. So like, for example, there was a policy push when I was there to get the price of solar energy, the soft price down, because there were too much regulatory soft costs. And that happened. And that was one of the reasons why we're seeing the solar market take off. So it's those kinds of things that are needed. And I think in the ocean space, this commitment from the UN panel on 100% of every country's national waters will be sustainably managed. Well, we need real strong policy to make sure that happens. What does management mean? Different parts of the ocean will have to be managed differently for different aspects of it. How do we ensure there's metrics to ensure we're doing it correctly? So there's a huge amount of policy that needs to be developed in the ocean space to keep our to benefit from ocean wealth through ocean health. So I think that's an area where we need to move forward. There's also the International Seabed Authority. You know, there's still international waters, which we need to look at policy around that space. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, wow, that's an interesting little tentative sort of discussion for some other time. It looks like we're coming up to the end of our little chunk of time for conversation. I'll pass it over to Tessa to take some questions from our audience.
Wow, that was fast. Thanks, Leigh.
Thank you so much, Leigh and Kate. That was so interesting to witness your conversation on so many different points, and I hope the audience learned as much as I did. So we're now going to move to the opportunity for audience members to ask questions, and we're doing this through Slido. So if you can join us on Slido and upvote the questions that you're interested in or input the questions that you have on that platform, that'll really help us sort through all of these. So I'm going to pull up Slido and let's take a look. We have a top question here from Max Showalter, who asks, how does ONC hope to leverage the UN Ocean Decade to build on your mission? And I think, Kate, you mentioned a little bit of this in your conversation with Leigh, but perhaps you could expand a little on how we hope to incorporate this.
Well, I mentioned we want to continue to advocate for the Indigenous knowledge to be incorporated into that, into the decade, because it's not just the hard scientific data. It's this rich historical knowledge and current knowledge from Indigenous peoples. So that's something that we really want to make sure that that stays front and center, and our chief scientist is working on that in terms of the decade. We also want to be sure that we advance more of an applied solutions for the adaptation part of the research. There's much going on, but if it could be coordinated whereby I'll just use the COVID example, that the virologists and the people who make vaccines, I forget what they're called, but they banded together and they worked together and they brought different resources together to advance something very quickly. And I think that's the other piece that we want to do as Ocean Networks Canada, showcase what our strengths are, bring those to the table, and then marry them with other organizations' strengths so we can advance these climate change adaptation solutions. We also want to move forward on the mitigation solutions I talked about. Certainly, reducing emissions is not really, direct reduction of emissions is not really part of Ocean Networks Canada's work. We are an organization that we work to be net zero. But we need other industries to do that. But we also need to enhance the ocean's ability to capture carbon and sequester it, what's called durably sequester it, so that we can get to a place where the planet is at a temperature where we can thrive. And really looking at it from the Indigenous perspective, which is 7 generations. That's how we have to think about the durability, that we keep the planet in a sustainable manner that is there for 7 generations to come.
Thank you so much for that response, Kate. I think also at ONC, we have an exciting thing that's happening, which is that we're going carbon neutral. And I think there might be more that comes out about that later. So if you're following us on our networks, you can wait for that exciting announcement. We're also an organization that sponsors the Virtual Blue Decade, which hopes to bring communications about the UN Ocean Decade to public members of anywhere, of regions around the world, who can join without having to sign up for these conferences or have the accessibility to these conferences. So those are two other ways that we're getting involved. We have another question from Maria, and she's asking, Canada has 4 coasts, including the freshwater Great Lakes. Will Canada propose similar strategies to include the Great Lakes in this North American blue economy? Great question, Maria.
Yeah, so I can say the answer is yes. The Minister of Fisheries and Oceans in the Canadian Coast Guard on a Zoom call I was on with others and the minister, she clearly said that the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence Seaway are all part of Canada's blue economy. So yes, and of course that's a place of incredible current economic benefit to Canada. So ensuring that that's sustainable will be very important going forward. And I know that in Canada, there's now what's called a new oceans program in the National Research Council. And that program is also interested in seeing that we have some stronger observational technology in the St. Lawrence Seaway so that there could be much more protection for marine mammals, try to reduce noise for mammals and for other animals in the ocean. And so that's something that they're interested in seeing if they can advance in a much more rapid fashion. So thanks for that question, Maria.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. All right. So we have another question. I think, Kate, you've spoken about this a few times, but maybe we can readdress it one more time. So can you talk about how coastal communities and particularly Indigenous and First Nations groups can participate as key drivers in this new blue economy? I remember that you mentioned that we want to be thinking about 7 generations in our past and 7 generations in our future, but are there other ways that Indigenous and First Nations groups can participate?
Yes, I think what we have to do is look at new business models. And I'm really thrilled to know about a company called Cascadia Seaweed. It's started here in British Columbia. And the business model is that they're developing the technology to farm macroalgae or kelp for food, and as a carbon remover. And they're developing the technology. They are partnering with Indigenous communities who will lease that technology from Cascadia Seaweed, grow the kelp, and they would be the producers of that food. And that's where the Indigenous communities would then get revenue from that model. And there's others like that we need to begin to engage. And we're doing this at Ocean Networks Canada. We're engaging students in the business school and challenging them with these climate adaptation, climate mitigation needs in the future, and asking them to develop new business models. And of course, because we're here at the University of Victoria, the business school is committed to ensuring that the Indigenous voice is at the table in everything they do, including in the business school. So I think we're going to see more business models like I just described coming out of this, the young folks in business schools looking at how they can grow these industries with benefits to the broader stakeholder groups.
Yes, I think if you're a student in the audience and you're interested in working with Ocean Networks Canada or doing some research with us, you should definitely reach out. We have lots of brilliant students who contribute to our work. So we have another question, and this is an easy one. How can members of the public use data from Ocean Networks Canada?
Well, we have a website, and there's a data, you can click on data, and there's different ways you can get the data. It's all openly available. So you can download it, you can view it, you can look at, there's some automatic reports that we do called Preview. They just deliver the data in nice chunks so that you can easily see it. But if you want data in a different way, we have an entire data team with different kind of specialists who can, depending on the priorities we place on it, can package it in ways that's important for you. Because you can get data automatically through web services. So every way that you think that data are delivered, we deliver them that way. So, and we're also always interested in input. We've just developed a new dashboard where you can basically customize your own dashboard that will update certain data that you're interested in seeing on a regular basis. We also have, if you're interested in video, our visual data, we have a wonderful product called Seatube, SEATUBE, where it's searchable for any kind of, like you could go there, search on octopus, and it will take you to a video that has octopus in it, and you can download those videos too. So take a look at those. We're working on trying to get a tool similarly for sound, and that's just in the works now. Does that answer it, Tessa? Does that cover the landscape?
Yes, that's wonderful. I was in a classroom with some high school students who were using our Oceans 2.0 data portal, I think just last week, and it was really easy for them to use. There's an automatic plotting utility that comes up when you use the tool. So if you're a member of the audience and you want to use data from any of our amazing array of sensors and instruments at the bottom of the ocean, you can go ahead and do that. All it takes is an internet connection, really, to be able to connect with us. So I have another question. With the recent glacier flood in India in mind, how is Canada planning to mitigate sea level rise? This is an interesting question. There was recently a glacial lake outburst flood in India as a result of warming, and then a glacier lake that was behind this dam burst through and had terrible consequences for the community in that area. So I guess how is Canada planning to think about sea level rise and flooding and the consequences that come from these types of events?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that scientists have been aware of this ignored, what we call the ignored pole, the third pole, which are the glaciers, the large mountain glaciers of the world, including the largest that sit in the Himalaya. And so, and one of the biggest impacts from that melting is going to be a loss of freshwater sources for maybe a billion people or more. So that's really one of the worrisome aspects of losing that what we call the third pole. In terms of Canada and sea level rise, the federal government is really, they've identified some of the areas in Canada at most risk. One of them here in British Columbia is just south of Vancouver, called Boundary Bay. Tuktoyaktuk in the Arctic is one of the areas of high risk, and much of Atlantic Canada, mainly in the maritime provinces, are at risk. What we're doing as an organization is working with government to develop what we call digital elevation models. So these are actually knitting together bathymetry with topography in high resolution, like as much as a meter resolution, so that we can begin to forecast storm surge, sea level rise, and identify infrastructure communities at highest risk, so that decisions can be made about, can we protect them? Should we move them? You know, there's all these aspects. We have to actually start thinking about retreat. And so those are three areas that we've just completed a digital elevation model for the Boundary Bay area, all the way from south of the border in Washington State up to North Vancouver, which is a wonderful tool. So that's the kind of services we need for adaptation to sea level rise.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We need the data to understand how we're going to intervene. I have a question from the audience that I think is good for both Leigh and Kate. The question is, what can the average person do to support the growth of the blue economy? Maybe I'll ask Kate to go first, and then Leigh, you can follow up.
Well, I think one of the important aspects of supporting the blue economy as an individual is to buy local. There's so much that we bring. I mean, marine transportation is a relatively efficient way to move goods, but it still is polluting, and just the production of all the stuff that we purchase. So that's a simple thing, and it's hard to imagine that helps the blue economy, but it would, because it would keep the ocean healthier. I think the other thing is to become knowledgeable about the ocean, and we try to, as Tessa said, there's lots of programs we have. If you can inform yourselves and your community, and then let your members of parliament, if you're in Canada, or senators, representatives in the US, let them know that you know that the ocean is 70% of the planet, and we've been ignoring it, and we need to not only benefit from its resources, but protect them for those 7 generations to come. I'll turn it over to Leigh.
Oh gosh, what can average citizens do with respect to the blue economy? I mean, I would pick one particular area which I'm very interested in, which is, well, along the lines of what Kate was just talking about with respect to shipping, and heavy transport more generally, aviation and long distance shipping are very hard to electrify. Very simply, there's no recharging station in the middle of the Pacific. So what we're going to have to do is, if we reduce shipping or reduce aviation, we're only just reducing our emissions from those sectors. And really, we know now that it's not a matter of just reducing emissions. We absolutely have to eliminate them. So that means that if we're going to maintain current rates of shipping of goods around the world and maintain a globalized world, we do have to come up with some sort of clean fuels. And that's something that I just don't see a lot of activism around with respect to NGOs, environmental organizations. There's not a lot of policy, industrial policy, to support the development of those things. There's a lot of commitment and activism and policy making and thought out there around decarbonizing our electricity grid, which is great. That's awesome. So much more now than there has been for at the start of the 2010s or the 2000s. We're much farther advanced now. We now need to be getting as serious about clean fuels, and truly clean fuels, not like fake clean fuels, over the next 10 to 20 years. That's the thing. I mean, if somebody out there is listening and wants to start an environmental NGO pushing for clean fuels, that'd be amazing. In shipping, I guess.
Great answer, Leigh. Thank you. I think Ocean Networks Canada has also given at least 2 presentations on the impacts of COVID on shipping and how that affects marine life. And so if you're interested in watching those presentations from 2 of our staff scientists, you can find those on our YouTube channel. So we have a question here in the Zoom chat from Gretchen. She says, you mentioned the possible future loss of the 3rd pole of glaciers and the loss of freshwater supply. Has our organization started thinking about easier, cheaper, and cleaner ways of desalinization of ocean water to provide potable water to these communities at risk for losing water supplies? Great question.
Yeah, we haven't, we're not working on that particular problem, but others are. I know that there's some, I understand that there's some desalination efforts that are moving forward in countries like Australia. And here in British Columbia, at the University of Victoria, there's an engineering researcher who is looking at inexpensive mobile clean water systems for remote communities in British Columbia. So I'm sure there's others. And once they can be demonstrated to be successful, they can deploy more broadly.
Right. We're not the only organization out there that cares about ocean issues, and there's other organizations which are doing amazing work, and many of which we partner with. So here's another question. What opportunities do you see for more sustainable shipping while growing the blue economy? And I guess both Leigh and Kate, you might have input into that. And I think we'll also take just 1 or 2 more questions before closing the session today. So if you do have a burning question, please throw it in the Zoom chat if you can't make it to the Slido, or make it to the Slido.
Well, I think one of the issues that is helpful is that ships are getting larger. And that might sound surprising, but larger ships are much more efficient. They use less fuel per volume of goods. So even though they're burning fossil fuels, there'll be less per unit of product. But as Leigh said, it's really important to start getting some clean fuels. There's an effort in Newfoundland now to actually build out a port that includes direct air capture that would then produce liquid fuel, so that they would be then, if successful, this is a concept at the moment, they would be pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, making it a zero-sum game in terms of carbon, and then having that be fueling vessels from that port. That's just a concept at the moment. But of course, one of the easiest things you can do is enhance shipping by putting sails back on, and that's happening too. So this is not our area. There's an organization in Canada called Clear Seas, the Center for Responsible Marine Shipping, based in Vancouver, but it's a national entity. And you can go to clearseas.org, and they have a lot of information about more sustainable shipping in a wide range of areas. and terrific infographics, and you can learn things about shipping very rapidly by just going to their website.
Thank you, Kate. Yes, putting sails back on ships sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing I would because I answered some of that a minute ago or so, the only thing I would add would be that what makes so much of this really exciting is that it's a bit of a no-brainer in terms of a just transition for a lot of oil and gas workers. A lot of the skill sets that are applicable to those areas are very easily adaptable, giving high wage, high skilled, family supporting jobs to those workers. So it's I mean, so much of what we talk about with the clean transition is making sure that the people least responsible for it are not bearing the burden of that transition. And we are seeing in the middle of Canada at the moment, there's there are real issues and heartbreak with communities suffering from the collapse in oil prices. And that's good in some respects, it's good for the climate, but what we need to be able to do is provide decent opportunities for these people so that they can thrive. And the blue economy really answers that question very well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you for bringing up the point of a just transition. And it's interesting to think about how that's going to apply to the ocean as well as on land. So I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A today. Thank you so much, Leigh, Kate. Thank you to the audience for your wonderful questions. We would just like to share a video about Ocean Networks Canada's 15th anniversary, which is this year. So I'll have our tech person pull that up for us all right now. Yes, and we also have a survey that was just posted in the chat. And if you have 3 minutes to let us know how we did today, if you learned anything interesting, that would be great to help us improve for future events. All right, so we'll play the video now.
Since 2006, Ocean Networks Canada's deep sea, coastal, and land-based ocean observatories have been bringing data to the surface for science, society, and industry. Our data informs discovery and decision-making. Everything from monitoring earthquakes and tsunamis to understanding whales, hydrothermal vents, and the impact of climate change on ocean systems and Arctic sea ice. With 15 years of continuous real-time open data, we now have a benchmark for monitoring our changing ocean. We've come a long way. In 2006, Ocean Networks Canada made history as the world's first large-scale interactive real-time portal into the ocean when a node was connected to the internet off the coast of Vancouver Island. This international collaboration marked the beginning of a new way of doing science, which enabled tremendous advances in the world's understanding of the ocean at a critical time. As we embark on the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, it has never been more important to know the ocean. We are committed to world-leading innovation in ocean monitoring technology that will continue to grow Canada's leadership in ocean intelligence. As we look forward to the next decade of ocean observing, please join us to celebrate the successes, collaborations, and partnerships that made our first 15 years possible.
All right, that brings us to the end of our session today. If you would like to stay in contact with Ocean Networks Canada, you can follow us on our Twitter page, our Facebook page, our YouTube. We're very active also on Instagram, and we'll be sharing a lot of things in the upcoming months as this is our 15th anniversary. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I wish you a wonderful day, no matter where in the world you are.